Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be going over the newly revealed cards from the Ruler of the Black Flame. This comes out next week in Japan and is part of our Obsidian Flames set coming out on the 11th of August, so really close actually. So yeah, this is going to be a really impactful set. It's going to be the set that kicks off the 2024 season for all of us, so definitely worth taking a look at. Let's jump down to the trainer cards and get into it. First of all, with the Letter of Encouragement, you can only play this card only if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn. You get to search your deck for up to 3 basic energy cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. I actually feel like this is a pretty solid card, to be honest with you. It does have that downside, similar to like a Raihan, where you can only do it as a response to getting knocked out. But grabbing 3 basic energy can be good for a number of archetypes. I can see this being like a one-of in Chien-Pao. I can see it being a one-of in Gardevoir, actually, as well. Just grabbing a ton of psychic energy immediately so you can start refining and using Greninja to get rid of these could also be really good. We'll see a few other new cards for Gardevoir as well later today, where ramping specifically psychic energy is going to be really, really important. That's always the goal of Gardevoir. But because this is tutorable via Mew as well, I think it's probably worth a space, honestly. It could be good for the Grafaiai players, and also there's a Toedscruel EX, which might work with Cherim. So there's a lot of decks that I'm thinking we want to just pull a ton of basic energy out of the deck. I feel like due to the nature of the text of the card, you probably don't want to play, 3 or 4 copies unless you are playing like Grafaiai. So it's going to be like a 1/2 of at most, but seems pretty reasonable to me. We have the Patrol Cap, which says, as long as the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot, cards in your deck can't be discarded by effects of your opponent's attacks, abilities, item cards, tools, or supporters. The text at the top here is copied from the card below. There's not many discard effects that I'm that scared of, but this is, I guess, some protection if there is going to be some disruption style decks. Yeah, I don't think anyone will actually play this card because control archetypes never really reach that peak of play that makes it worth the tech inclusion, but it's something that we have as a security blanket in case Sander goes too far at any point in the game. We have the Revenge Punch, which says when the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack of your opponent's Pokemon, put 4 counters on the attacking Pokemon. Reminds me of Bursting Balloon, reminds me a little bit of Spell Tag, although it was a lot less flexible. Typically you like the more proactive damage of just increasing with like Choice Belt or Defiance Band, but we are moving into a range where there are going to be more single prize attackers, where there are going to be more EX based Pokemon, and this also reminds me of Box of Disaster, which has started to see play in some V-Star decks. Now the Revenge Punch is something you can immediately put into decks to try and counter Gardevoir, of course. And this is more universal. We could start seeing the Revenge Punch going into all sorts of things because it doesn't rely on being a V Pokemon in general. So this is a counter card to Gardevoir, and it's more universal than what we currently have. So kind of nice, actually, as Gardevoir looks to be getting pushed more and more. Each set he gains more tools. So having a more universal sort of counter card to try and respond to the archetype is kind of solid, to be honest with you. We move on to some supporters. We have Geeta. Until the end of the turn you play this card, none of your Pokemon can attack, including Pokemon that are put into play this turn, but you get to search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards and attach them to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. Pretty interesting card text in that you can throw this card out there, then still do a number of actions, whereas in the past we'd just seen things like Kiawe, which plays it and immediately ends your turn. So it does allow you to do a couple of cool, more interesting things, I suppose. You could use other end-of-turn abilities. Basically anything but attacking is open to you, so you can get some additional value, not just the supporter itself. But I do think this opens the door for some more difficult to power up cards that just are well statted. I'm thinking of things like the Copper Raja EX, which has a ton of great things going for it. I'm thinking of even Regidrago V-Star. These Pokemon just have weird ways of getting into the game right now, and this supporter might be the thing that gets your initial one rolling, and you can find other means of acceleration throughout the remainder of the game. So I'm kind of intrigued by the card. I think it's going to be for those sorts of on-the-fringe attackers that don't have the right energy acceleration just yet to sort of be stabilized in the game, and it could end up seeing play in those sorts of archetypes. I don't think it goes into anything that we already currently know of, because everything that we currently have in the game already like functions without this sort of card, and at the end of the day it is still quite niche, narrow. Its window of opportunity is quite short because there aren't many turns of Pokemon where you're allowed to not attack. It's probably only in your setup turns that you can use this card, which means it's more likely going to be that sort of low count unless you're completely building a deck around it and happy to like throw these away throughout the rest of the game, as if it was like a VIP pass where you use it once, the rest are just duds. So yeah, something to bear in mind. We have Ortega. It's a supporter that allows you to look at your opponent's hand, then choose a card you find there, put it to the bottom of their deck, then your opponent may draw one card. It's a little bit of soft hand disruption. I feel like Handlock in general, just in a world with Iono, hand disruption style combos are actually really hard to piece together, because we know that so many archetypes are already preparing for Iono, so they have a lot of onboard draw. We see a lot of Barrel right now, we see Curliers, even in decks that aren't just Gardevoir, we're starting to see it, you know, in Wings of Union and other things like that, right? Just because you want to have onboard draw so you're not completely wrecked by Iono. So that actually makes hand disruption supporters, I think, much worse in the game, where you can't really weave this in too easily just in conventional decks, because you would just be playing Iono instead, and it means that most decks are normally safeguarding around handlock that little bit more. So if there is going to be a handlock deck, maybe this is a thing where you play it, but I feel like it's really hard to make that happen, especially when people are already going to have lots of ways around, you know, being put to a low hand size throughout the game. We have the Poppy supporter, allows you to move 2 energy from one of your Pokemon to another of your Pokemon. So it's 2 energy switches in a supporter effect. We have had Lucian's assignment in the past, and this also gives me vibes of that. I don't feel like this is that strong, to be honest with you. We have good energy acceleration for most archetypes that are functional right now. We don't need to have the sort of energy fixing, I suppose. One of the main reasons why you want to move energy is so you could use like Cheryl or something anyway, and that conflicts with this card because it's a supporter. So yeah, I don't see many reasons why I would want a Poppy, to be honest with you. Maybe there are some self-accelerating Pokemon that you then can shift onto other things, but I don't think that's like that high a priority. We have Rhyme. It's a supporter that allows you to draw 3, then switch your opponent's active to the bench. I really do love the fact that they're doing these more interesting just draw 3 cards, because this is something that you could consider, right? We're playing ropes in decks just so we can have that push, get away from me effect for certain Pokemon, and now we can have it in a supporter card. Yes, I think it's probably a little underpowered and might not see that much play, but it's a consideration. It's, you know, it's a thing that you got to take out of packs and put in your bulk at some point, knowing that there may be a deck that just wants that much push potential to go alongside your ropes and boss's orders or whatever. I think it's underpowered, but at least it's a more interesting draw 3 card, which is great for the sort of card design team, I suppose. We have the Town Department Store. It's a stadium card that once during each player's turn, that player may search their deck for a tool card, reveal it and put it into their hand. Then that player shuffles their deck. There are going to be, well, there's at least one deck, the Reverum EX, that is very likely to be playing this card. But in general, I think this is really solid. I'm thinking like Miraidon players would really like this because they already have a ton of tool cards that they could try and put into their deck list at different times. I'm thinking that Lost Box could really like this as well, because you're obviously playing your Forest or Skyseal Stones, and this is a crucial piece to just get you into the game. The first time you use this department store and you grab Forest Seal Stone, the value is extremely high. Having a comp search tutor is really good for you, and although I think the stadium does kind of like fall off a little bit, just having that like extra copy in some regards, we've seen so many times that Mew players are at 3 copies, Turbo Lost Boxes are at 3 copies of the Forest. Now you can have a Stadium bounce in that slot and still go like down on Forest Seal Stones and still have that same reliability of getting there. So this could end up as a Mew like Path Bounce, for example, as well. There's so many reasons why, just from the Forest Seal Stone alone, this card is likely to see some play in a number of decks. But it also just changes deck building, right? Like, one-of choice belts could be much better. I'm thinking again in Lost Box, where your Dragonite now has that 280 pop-off potential. You give yourself a Town Department Stole, you have a much more reliable means of finding that choice belt when you want it. There could be Bravery Charms going into all sorts of decks as another like tech inclusion to push yourself out of range of cards. This really just opens the door, if you just played 2 department stores, now to have Tutor for tools. So really exceptional card, I think. This is going to see a lot of play and can, again, sort of change that deck building. And if you really lean into this Stadium card, you could get a lot of value out of it. So something to bear in mind. Then we have Pokemon League HQ. The attack cost for each basic Pokemon in play is 1 colorless more. Pretty interesting card, honestly. I thought this was going to be a big tech card, to be honest, for God of War players, but we've seen the recent League promo, which I suppose that we're not looking at today, but the League promo Stadium card that seems really good for God of War probably trumps most other things, to be honest with you. But this seems like a reasonable tech card. I think Zoro Box players can rejoice that they have a card that they could use to defend against Lost Box that little bit more, where you can try and hand disrupt them, throw down the HQ. Makes it more difficult for them to lost mine you throughout the remainder of the game. I think that's, yeah, pretty handy, I suppose. This seems like a pretty good Stadium card. God of War could still end up playing this because it's, again, another Path Bounce, and you're very rarely attacking with basic Pokemon, and if you are, the Zacian's fully loaded anyway, so you don't really ever feel a downside. This definitely does feel like a check to the sort of late game strategy of a Lost Zone player, so that seems pretty solid. Let's jump up to the top and start looking at the Pokemon in a bit more detail then. We have a Trevenant. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, put 1 counter on your opponent's active Pokemon during Pokemon Checkup. Okay, if we have some hit and run style decks, this is a damage mod in some regards. Not great, though. I guess its attack is also trying to stop retreating. That's kind of cute. You have a Scovillain, which is a grass and fire type. I think this is relevant just because it hits 110 and has 2 weaknesses to boast, so it could end up being a Zorobox include, just because you can slap the reversal energy on, and now you're hitting 220 onto 2 different type coverages. Maybe that's relevant. Nothing really to say on the Charmander and Charmeleon. They are just vanilla cards, which is a real shame, because we are going to look at the Charizard later, but having no help from these guys isn't really what we're looking for right now. Have an Entei. As long as this Pokemon is in your active position, your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks do 20 less damage, and its attack is Blaze Ball. You do 50 plus 20 more for each fire energy attached to this Pokemon. Not a bad card, honestly. We have such great acceleration for fire energy now via Charizard EX that cards like this are actually kind of okay. 130 bulky hit points with that inbuilt reduction. Yeah, a reasonable enough attack is actually 60 base, not the 50. That's why I was confused for a second. But yeah, this could be your single prize early game attacking Mon in Charizard. You hit that candy turn 2, suddenly you're blaze balling with a pretty chunky single prizer. Good thing to bear in mind. An Ice Q EX, it's a basic fire type, and I should mention that Terrastals are finally getting some more interesting cards. This is the first one that we're looking at, where, of course, Ice Q is typically going to be a water Pokemon and actually attacks for water energy, but this is Terrastaled into a fire type. You can see its little hat up there. So we are looking at a basic 210 hit point fire Pokemon that still has the same, it can't be hit or can't be damaged while it's on the bench, which is fine, and has the Scalding Block attack for 3 water energy. You deal 160 and discard an energy from this Pokemon. The defending Pokemon can't attack during your opponent's next turn. So pretty okay, honestly, and we know we have great water energy acceleration from Super Cold, so if ever we're worried about some upcoming like grass archetypes or anything else that has fire weakness, you can slot the Ice Cube right in. Suddenly you're hitting 320 with this one basic Pokemon, so yeah, it seems reasonable just for that. Discarding energy from this and then the defending Pokemon can't attack isn't really that great text, but I suppose when you are using like Iono late game, it can be a panic button option. If you don't necessarily have enough water to like push through a big EX or a big VMAX Pokemon with your Chien-Pao, you can pop this down, do a hand disruptor, hope that the annoying text sort of sees you through to the late game. So having a weakness option and like a panic button, at least I haven't lost on board kind of attack, is maybe okay. I don't think it's necessarily worth the space right now, but if we start seeing grass decks popping up, it could be good for Chien-Pao to have. Although this is already, like, Chien-Pao's already a one-hit KO deck, so I don't think it necessarily needs the space for this card. A Seismitoad has, okay, I read the word quaking and already I'm quaking. The ability is Quaking Area. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks cost 1 colorless more. Really annoying ability. Very solid, actually. Has the Echoed Voice for 2 water, 120 during your next turn. This Pokemon's Echoed Voice is 100 more. Yeah, unfortunately, you just don't have the attack to back up a pretty good ability. We have Finizen with Brave Evolution. You can switch this with one of your bench, then search for a card that evolves onto Finizen and evolve straight away. This is much better than just regular Fast Evolution or like Ascension attacks. This is a really, really good attack effect. Let's see if the Palafin holds up. I know this is the pre-release promo. It has Jet Punch, which is 30-30 for 1 water, and then for 2 water we have Justice Kick. If this Pokemon didn't move from the bench to the active, this does nothing. So you've got to get into the active again, and you can hit 210 for 2. Pretty efficient attack on a single prizer, and 150 hit points is also really high for a single prize attacker. Don't necessarily think that, like, the 210 threshold's actually quite bad. We need to be doing more damage more often than not, which is a bit of a shame. But it's efficient, and it's a single prizer. Maybe there's something around it. 2 water energy also makes it a little bit awkward. There's just enough awkward things that make this probably not playable, but it's a reasonable single prize attacking mon, I suppose. We have T-Tar EX, which is a lightning type thanks to being terastallized. 340 hit points on a 2-prize Pokemon is crazy, and it has the Mounting Crumble for 1 fighting. You deal 120 and discard the top 2 cards of your deck. Not ideal, but it is an efficient 1 energy attack option. And we also have the Toll Rampage for 2 fighting energy. You do 150. If any of your benched Pokemon have damage counters on them, this is 100 more damage. So 250 damage, pretty easy to set up, having damage on one of your bench Pokemon with some stadiums or a few other things going on here and there. So it shouldn't be too difficult to fulfill a 250 damaging attack. Obviously, we can try and belt our way to 280, which is a pretty solid number. This is just like a really well-statted guy. I feel like it's too fair in that you're not really cheating much. You need to get your turn attachment on 1, you need to get your candy on 2, you need to get your attachment on 2 to be doing all this stuff, and you've got to jump for a few more hurdles to do really reasonable damage, unfortunately. So it feels like there's just like not enough payoff for the T-Tar, I suppose. Its biggest payoff is like it's big, and it hits kind of enough in most situations, but not always. So yeah, it feels like probably not going to be competitive enough unless the lightning type coverage becomes like super relevant again. At the moment I think it's like okay because of Lugia and sometimes you catch some Palkias, but I don't feel like the lightning type coverage is good enough to want to have a deck like this just like on standby in the meta, I suppose. So yeah, I don't think it's going to see a huge amount of play. We have a Thunderous. It has the Bad Weather ability. As long as this Pokemon is in your active spot, prevents all damage done to your benched Pokemon by your opponent's attacks. Is there any reason why we want this active? Well, for 2 lightning you deal 140, and this does 190 to itself. That's actually a pretty big burst of damage for 2 energy. We obviously do have great acceleration for lightning. Preventing all damage done to your bench Pokemon. No, this probably doesn't make the cut in Miraidon lists. Probably not, I would say. This does 50 plus 30 more for each different type of Pokemon on your bench. Oh, okay, we get Rainbow Force back? Right, so we can hit 200, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, it's not a big payoff, I suppose. You need to always have one of your bench Pokemon being another Lightning type. I suppose you could also play Zoroark as your Dark type, so you can always get back into Tox. You can probably quite easily fulfill this, but the damage payoff just isn't that high anymore. This needed to be higher damage output for a Rainbow Force deck to be worthwhile, I think. We have Cleffer, which is a throwback to obviously old Eek Cleffers. 30 hit points, free retreater, has the Grasping Draw attack. For 0 energy, you draw until you have 7 in hand. I don't think this is that great, actually, in the format. Obviously, having low hit points right now is a death sentence with Lost Zone players around and other things that want to do little prods of damage because of Gardevoir. So I think it's too volatile to be playing Cleffer in the game. You want the immediacy of Celebration's Mew more often than not, just a C6 and have a potential high roll of hitting your VIP pass or just any ball search card. I think that's just higher value than Cleffer in most instances. And a lot of the time you want to have that sort of instant draw in most decks, not even just like Gardevoir itself, because yeah, you can just do stuff with the card straight away, whereas if you're going for the draw until you have 7, it's not that great, especially because it's not shuffle and draw, which is what Eek used to be. So if you have a clunky or slow hand, you don't actually get much value from this card anyway. The only upside of like drawing up rather than shuffling in is that you can try and make candy combos a little bit more reliable, I suppose. But yeah, this is essentially like a Gormandize, but we've lost 120 hit points on it, which is just really bad. Yeah. Having free retreat's not bad though. We have a Togekiss, 150 hit point, stage 2, has the Precious Gift ability. Once during your turn, after your attack, you draw until you have 8 cards in your hand. It also has free retreats, and it has the Power Cyclone attack for 2 colors. You do 110 and movement energy from this Pokemon to one of your benched Pokemon. Yeah, like I was saying with the Cleffa, basically drawing cards at the end of your turn is so much worse than having them during your turn that it's probably not worth making a stage 2 for this effect. It's essentially a double Radiant Venusaur. Drawing up to 8 is like a really good amount of cards that you get to recover, but don't forget that because after your attack, your opponent still has the response of being able to Iona you back down to a low hand size, so yeah, this is like the worst time possible to be drawing cards. This sort of window is the worst time to be doing it. So yeah, this probably just won't see any play. As a free retreater though, it also has some upside, but I don't think it's going to make it. We have the Lunatone. It's got the New Moon ability. If you have any Soul Rock in play, prevent all effects of your opponent's stadium cards done to your Pokemon. Let's quickly look at the Soul Rock. It has a call for family attack. Search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. Kind of nice that it's not bad to have a Soul Rock in the opening stages anyway, I suppose. But this is taking up a couple bench spaces. I think the big stadium that we're all thinking of course, is going to be Path of the Peak. So that you can make sure that your Rulebox Pokemon are still going to be doing their thing. But taking a look at like Mew, taking a look at Chien-Pao, taking a look at Gardevoir, all of these decks that get affected by Path, they don't really have the board space to play Solrock Lunatone anyway. And like you could just turn these 2 spaces as like the minimum count for this combination into just more bounces of stadiums or just more outs, and I think you're going to have a better time overall. Even like Chien-Pao just playing a 1/1 big barrel instead of this and keeping the same amount of stadium bounce outs is probably stronger. You may end up being able to like save deck space by just playing this 1/1 count, but I don't think it's worth it in that all of these decks are really board hungry and want to go as wide as possible. So I actually think this is like kind of glamorous, but won't see a huge amount of play, at least in the decks that we're currently looking at that have abilities. Something to bear in mind. It may end up in the Toadscruel archetype though. That's kind of interesting, that you can't get pathed out of your ability so that you're protecting from effects the entire time. Because I know Giratina plays Path quite heavily, and that could be their way of still lost mining you. So maybe it makes some room in that deck that might have some more board space. I'm not really sure. I haven't really built Toadscruel just yet, but we have a Claydol that can put an opponent down to 10 hit points remaining, then does 120 to itself. So if we can health buff this, it doesn't knock itself out necessarily, and you can try and poison your opponent's active. Sure, there's some gambits there. We've seen this in the past. The 1 Psychic Energy attack cost makes it a lot more reliable than ones that we have seen before, though, so maybe it's worth doing. It's just you need to combine this with, yeah, hit point buffs and other things that you can try and do to try and make it a thing. But, yeah, more of a gimmick. We have a Vespiquen, which is a Terrestrial Psychic type. 270 hit points, has for a Grass Energy, Recovery Pheromones, healing 60 from one of your Pokemon, and for 3 Grass Energy, you deal 200 to the active and put 3 counters on each of your opponent's benched Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. We have Hawlucha, we have Gapejaw Bog, we have a number of ways we can try and target down certain things, and placing counters is a really good way of dealing your bench damage, as we know. This could set up some Yoga Loops, this could set up all sorts of things. The triple Grass Energy attack cost is pretty bad, I suppose, but you can Cherim before you evolve into a Vespiquen, I suppose. There's a few ways we can try and get this done. It's not terrible, but I don't really see many selling points, especially for a Psychic type, right, where you're sharing those same weaknesses that Gardevoir has. You have to be a really high power level card to be able to try and get that done. Maybe there's a place in the game for it just because of the sneaky damage counter, Medicham, Yoga Loop, backdoor plays that are available to you. The damage output still feels a little bit under the bar that we need, and its attack cost is expensive, so it's a lot of work to try and get this one rolling. So we have some Houndstones. You can deal 200 if your opponent has exactly 2 or 4 prize cards remaining. Maybe a Zorobox card. It's always my first thought. Psychic typing for Zorobox. I guess you already have Medicham, but this is like a more universal attacker, I suppose. Always on the mind. Again, with the T-Tar, not much help from the Larvitar or the Pupitar. At least you have 70 hit points on this guy, but otherwise not too much help. We have a Bonsly. I think it's the first time we've had this for a number of years since the Diamond and Pearl era. So good for you, Bonsly. You're terrible, though. You'll never see play. Stunfisk, as long as this is in the active and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon. If this Pokemon has a tool attached, put 5 counters on the attacking Pokemon. Could be an interesting hit and run style Mon that you have, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. 30 and can't retreat. Yeah, sure. Maybe it opens up the door for some cheeky plays. You've seen this attack text be really, really good on Umbreon, and basically was meta warping, so don't underestimate those sorts of attack texts, especially when they're low damage, because you can make them infinites, essentially, at locking things. We have a look at the artwork at that. That is brilliant. Right. We have some Glimmets. There's actually a much better Glimmet, though, from Paldea Evolved. The one that I'm thinking of only has 40 hit points, but it does have the Ascension attack, which means we can go straight into the Glamora EX, which we have already translated in English. You're a Stage 1 fighting type with 270 hit points. You have the Dust Field ability. As long as this Pokemon is in the active position, your opponent can't have more than 3 benched Pokemon. If they have 4 or more, they discard until they have 3 on the bench. If more than one effect changes the number of benched Pokemon allowed, use the smaller number. So that means that at the most, they'll have 3 on their bench being allowed by this Dust Field, which is really interesting. We have the Poisonous Gem attack as well for 2 fighting. You do 140, and your opponent's active is now poisoned. This is a really solid card, I think. Having Ascension for this and trying to lock up the opponent's ability to go wide. I've already mentioned that this is really annoying for Mew players. It's really annoying for Guardy players, for Chien-Pao players. There's a lot of things you immediately limit from their draw power or just their backup options by limiting their bench to 3. It can be a really nice Pokemon just to go into to then enable you to do some spread attacks maybe later, because they don't have the space for Manaphy index as well. So even just having this option and then moving out of Dust Field at different points in the game, yes, you have that high 3 retreat cost, but we can find ways around this to then make sure that you're getting full value spread attacks in and stuff like that. So it's a really solid card just for its ability alone, but I also think the Poisonous Gem attack isn't a bad one. Being a fighting type and hitting 140 means we're really threatening the Arceus players in the game immediately, which is at least very appealing. And we know fighting type coverage is good in general. You get to also hit Miraidon, I suppose. And 140 is a really good baseline. You're getting through single prize Pokemon, you're getting through Guardies. So yeah, I think this is a really solid card. It doesn't look that impressive in just that it's a 2 for 140 attack and it only has 270 hit points. So stat-wise, it's a little bit undertuned, but its ability alone just makes other decks much clunkier, and you can find more windows of opportunity to punish other decks just by having this Dust Field in play and stopping them having all sorts of things. So I could see this going alongside like an Urshifu, for example, just so that you can have that spread option in the deck. It doesn't necessarily have to be this quad Glimora thing. It could be your opening couple turns sort of play, set the tempo, and take advantage of the fact that the opponent didn't get as well set up as they would have liked and come in with other attackers later. And don't forget that at any point during the game, as you retreat out, they're allowed to go wider again. You can go back into Dustfield later and force more discards. This is a really, really solid card, I think. We then have Charizard EX, what I'm touting to be the best Pokemon from the set. It's a dark type, thanks to its Terrestrial effect. Has 330 hit points, so real chonky, and it has the Infernal Control ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve, you may search your deck for 3 basic fire energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like, then shuffle your deck. This is insanely good burst energy acceleration. It's like a star portal, but you have the option to do this 3 or 4 times during a game, realistically. So yeah, especially because it's from deck, it's much more guaranteed. So just candying into Zard gives you a lot of means of attacking with all sorts of things. I think this opens the floodgates for some purely basic attacking fire decks like Entei, Delphox. I think Slacking V is really good with this card as well. It has that colorless 4 energy attack cost to deal 260. So suddenly just a turn attachment plus an Infernal Control gets you swinging with Slacking straight away. Of course, we have Spiritomb to shut down its own kind of lazy ability. So yeah, I think this could be really good with the deck. I think just powering up other like Zard pieces is going to be fine once 151 comes out as well, because there's also fire type Charizard EXs. I should also note that this is actually a really good attacker in its own right as well. For 2 fire energy, we have Burning Darkness, we deal 180, and it does 30 more for each prize card your opponent has taken. So already, instantly out the gate, you're threatening Gardevoir from every turn of the game. You're threatening Mew from every turn out of the game, which is insane. These are 2 kind of big archetypes right now, and you can immediately sort of have that punish potential into them. But as you work towards that sort of mid to late game, it just gets more and more dangerous to the point where you can be one-hit KOing a ton of things, right? That 30+ multiplier means you are getting towards that 300 threshold, and that means you're just a really, really good late game option. So I think Charizard's definitely worth building around. I haven't seen too many lists for it just yet, but I think it's got obvious power when you can throw like an extra 9 energy into play during a game quite reliably. I think it's just quite unfair. This card is really, really good, and definitely worth building towards. It lets you cheat space as well. You don't need to play that many energy in your deck. If you just play like these and rods or whatever, you can end up playing like 9 fire energy and be completely fine. So yeah, it's going to be a space cheater as well for you, which is pretty good. We have some busted artwork. Look at him and him. All right. We do have Clodsire as well. Look at him. Does 80 if they're poison, 120 more. I guess it synergizes with the EX, but probably still not good enough. We have an Absol EX for... It's a basic with 210 hit points, dark typing. It has for a Dark Energy Future Sight, look at the top 3 cards of either player's deck and put them back in any order. So there's the obvious, I can Iono you down and Future Sight you and try and control your top decks, but I've already talked about this when talking about the supporter guy, I can't remember his name, where there's just so many good engine mons that are going to top you back up on cards in most people's decks because they're already defending against Iono, that this card is not going to be good for that reason. We have the Cursed Slug attack for Dark Colorless. You deal 100 if your opponent has 3 or less cards in the hand. This does 120 more damage. It's too unreliable to try and get your opponent's hand size down that low, and the payoff's not that high, right? 220 is not a huge deal. So yeah, it's really expensive as well to attack with. Look at him. That's great artwork. We have Sizzle. This is a really good card. 140 hit points, stage 1. It has the Punish Scissor attack for 1 metal only. You do 10 and 50 more for each of your opponent's Pokemon in play with an ability. This is really, really strong. Yeah, we've seen Weavile in the past be exceptional. We're in a format with a ton of abilities right now. Every deck you can think of is jam-packed full of abilities. So this is going to get a huge amount of value. We have Luminous Energy as well, so this doesn't have to be a metal deck. You can just play your Luminous and get this rolling. This is a really, really powerful card. This is going to see a ton of play. And in some cases might be the beginning of some like stage 1 counter box decks that are basically stage 1s that are faster than Gardevoir. So yeah, this is a really, really strong card. Not just for like Zorobox as well. There could be decks that play a high count of Sizzle in their list and then just have other things helping out. So yeah, really powerful. This is going to be a meta warping card, I think. We have Mawile, 90 hit points basic, so it is searchable via level ball, which is nice. Has the Special Eater ability. When you put this into play, when you bench this, you can discard a special energy from your opponent's active. Not that big of a deal. We've seen Giratina in the past, but I don't feel like there's that much special energy to start punishing, to be honest with you. I don't think it's going to be that valuable. King Gambit, which is probably worth talking about. It's a 180 hit point stage 2 metal type that has the Execute attack for just 1 metal. If your opponent's active Pokemon has 4 or more counters on it, it is knocked out. Really interesting and powerful text. Getting 4 counters on something isn't necessarily the easiest, I suppose. We do have like Gatejaw Bog, we have Holuchas, we have some ping sort of abilities out there as well. We have Alakazam. So it can be done, but it probably does require some prep, which is a little bit awkward. One thing I will say is that we do have some good Bisharps. There is a Metal Bisharp still in format, I believe, that does 30 plus 30 more for each damage counter on each of your Pawniard. So we could have some like high tempo early from that Bisharp that's already wanting to play Gatejaw Bog. So it has synergy within that deck where you can end up having your opponent's Pokemon with counters on them as well. So for that reason, it could see some play. It's a lot of work and doesn't sound all that consistent, but the payoffs are huge when there are still 3 prizes roaming around in the metagame. So an interesting one as well. We have some Varooms, and we do have a Revavroom EX, 280 hit point metal type stage 1. Has the Tune Up ability, allowing us to attach 4 tools to this Pokemon. If you lose the ability, discard the tools from it until only 1 remains. And it has the Wild Drift attack for Metal colorless. You deal 170, and during your opponent's next turn, this takes 30 less damage from attacks. Really gives me that same vibe as I had for Copper where you can make this card super overstatted, especially thanks to its tune-up and having that inbuilt reduction. It's just a very tanky, annoying Stage 1 Pokemon. Being a Revavroom is also really good, so we can use the single prize Revavroom to be your draw engine all in one nice, neat package. So that's pretty good. I do fear that, of course, as soon as you start seeing path decks, your deck becomes infinitely worse because you don't have an infinite amount of tools, and once they immediately stop your first tune-up, you end up losing like some of your best tanking tools or some of your best offensive tools, which is a real shame, I think. So it's probably still going to be not that high power level. It's obviously weak to fire as well, so if we are trying to make this sort of tanky deck, and Charizard is a thing, even if they're just playing Entei, they're going to be able to burst through you, which really sucks. So yeah, I think this isn't going to be all that great. Pretty glamorous card, and it will be a headache for archetypes in the game if they're not playing paths or other means of getting around these tools. So you can try and build this ridiculous Revavroom that just sort of can't be beaten up, and you end up taking a ton of prizes just off spamming Wild Drift, and people can't really deal with you. But I don't think it's going to be that playable overall. It might still have some decent matchups in the game if there isn't much path going around. Or I suppose you could play Solrock Lunatone now as well, to be fair. Maybe this is the deck that plays Solrock Lunatone because your board space just needs to be a couple Revavroom. Huh, that's interesting. That maybe gives this deck a better defense against most things and ends up being that big tanky guy. Maybe this is new Goodra. Still difficult to power it up as well, of course. Don't forget that. Yeah, maybe it's better now just because of Solrock Lunatone. Maybe this was the combo we needed all along. We have Pidgeot EX as well, the throwback to Quick Search. I think everyone's chimed in on this one. 280 hit point colorless Pokemon that does have free retreat, even though it's reported as 1 down there, which is just wrong. But yeah, the Quick Search, once during a turn, you can search your deck for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. You can't use more than 1 Quick Search during each turn. It does also have the Fierce Winds attack for 2 colors. You deal 120 and discard a Stadium in play. A few key differences between Quick Search of then and now. Of course, games were much slower back then. You could Candy turn 1. You were a single prize Pokemon from Pidgeot. Pidgeot had relevant attacks in its era back in Fire Red, Leaf Green, and yeah, just a lot of reasons why this Pidgeot is substantially worse than old Pidgeot. But does that mean this still sees no play? Maybe not, because we're going towards candies and all sorts of things, and having this ability is still really, really powerful. Just closing games can be instantly so much easier thanks to 1 Quick Search. I do think that in general, things like the Barrel probably trump this card because it's so much easier to develop that, it's so much sooner to develop that, but the ability of Quick Search is still powerful, and getting free retreat is also not something to like laugh at. The one thing I'll say is that, yeah, it's a multi-prizer, so people are more incentivized to knock this out during the game as well, because you take out an engine and still get 2 prize cards as a reward. So there are reasons to think this is going to be far less powerful than old Quick Search. I think that's just inevitable, but it doesn't mean this is going to see no play ever. I don't think there's necessarily any decks that I'm looking at straight away and think, wow, this deck would love a Pidgeot, but I do think that if I play around with this card a lot more, and I'm playing a ton of rare candies, there's a world where we get to play a 101 Pidge and try and get it going. We probably need better evolution search as well, rather than just having 4 Ultra Ball to try and get that done. Maybe we need Pokecom back to try and make this more reliable at some points. But yeah, it's definitely not what it once was, unfortunately. Look at that. That's a treat as well. Look at the little... Yeah, that is brilliant. Okay. Just... Oh my god, look at him. That is... Oh, Pokemon, you are smashing it. Every time. Look at this. Look at... Oh my god. You know it's a Khmer straight away. Is he on the Yellow Brick Road? What is happening here? Is he playing Mario Kart and he's on Rainbow Road? I don't even know what's going on. This is insane. Yeah, and there we go. That's where we end things. So the overall highlights, I think Department Store is really, really good. I think Gita is interesting. Revenge Punch will probably see play just because of how Guardy is. The letter's actually pretty encouraging. Lol. What else we got? The Charizard's insane. Pidgeot probably will see some play. Now that I've realised that Lunatone Solrock can protect Tune-Up, I'm a lot more optimistic about this card being a tank once we get the 151 tool cards. King Gambit, probably too much work, but there could be a deck there. Scizor is just cracked. This is going to see a ton of play, I think. What else we got? Yeah, Glimora is also low-key really, really good, I think. Everyone respects the ability, but just as an attacking presence and how this might shift the metagame away from Arc is also really interesting, I think. Vespi, probably too much investment. I'm kind of more sold on Solrock Lunatone for at least a couple things, but not the decks that we really already know about in the game. So the website justinbasil.com has some translations for cards, which are probably also going to make it into our Obsidian Flames set, so I did just want to touch on these as well quickly. Decidueye, 320 hit point, stage 2, grass-type Pokemon with a Total Freedom ability. Once during a turn, you can use this. If it's on your bench, you can switch it to the active. If it's in the active, you can switch it with one of your benched Pokemon. Really flexible ability, really nice to see overall. And it does, unfortunately, only have the Hunting Arrow attack. You do 130 and 30 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Really not enough of a meaningful attack to make this worthwhile, I don't think. And we're not at the stage where we want to make a stage 2 just to have free retreat around the board. I really wanted to talk about this because Toadscruel was the card that I've referred to a couple times during the video so far. 270 hit point stage 1 grass-type Pokemon that has the Protective Filament ability, preventing all effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to all of your Pokemon that have energy attached to them. Existing effects are not removed. But it also has the Colony Rush attack. For 2 grass, you deal 80 plus 40 more for each of your benched Pokemon with grass energy attached, which means with a full bench all loaded up with energy cards, you can actually dish out the 280 damage. So this is a really potentially high damage output threat that also could be a real foil to Sableye, because you are denying the effects of attacks from opponent's Pokemon. So this might end up being a really solid counter deck to, Lost Box. It hits for Grass weakness, which is relevant for Charizard EX, because it's a dark type. It's actually weak to Grass. You're, of course, weak to Fire back, but you can at least try and punch each other as 2 multi-prize decks, which I think is really interesting. The ways we could try and power this up is either Forretress EX detonating itself, or trying a Cherim option, probably with like the barrel and maybe that Letter of Encouragement, where we try and go wide, we try and throw out grass energy around the board, and then we evolve up into our Toadscruel afterwards, of course, and become a Rule Boxer. So that could be really interesting. I think this card is powerful and has potential, and is probably one of the better cards from our set, so I did want to touch on it quickly. There's also a Victini EX that can deal 220, relevant, I guess, for the Charizard thing that I was talking about earlier. I don't think there's too many other good cards. I think there's just a couple other EXs which are more or less subpar. I think one of the better ones, so the Pawmot, not great. It can do a 220 spread attack for 2 lightning. You got to discard those lightning energy as well. It's just, again, too much work. Free retreat is nice, but otherwise, not great. I think this is one of the more playable ones. It's a basic Miraidon with 220 hit points and free retreat, which is something the Miraidon deck really does yearn for. For 1 lightning, you do 20 and draw a card, but for 3 lightning, you deal 150 and can attach a basic energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. This is actually really nice, because a lot of the time your first attack with Miraidon sort of sets that race up, but if you spend all your generators early, that's when your ratios are usually better. And just hitting those generators is fine, but then as you work to the late game, you need to find more generators, you need to hit more generators. Having this attack to start taking those single prize knockouts with no detriment, no downside, and the fact that you're getting attachments onto backup Miraidon, backup Raikou, that really relieves the pressure of hitting more generators throughout the sort of mid and late game. So I think this probably ends up seeing players like a 1/2 of in Miraidon already decks, because you want a free retreater, and this is one of the better attackers you can be using in the opening stages of the game. So I do think it's a small buff there. We have a Clefable EX. Each of your Pokemon that have Psych Energy attached have no retreat cost. This is going to try and work alongside the Clefable deck, I suppose, where they just move around and you pull Psychic Energy out of the deck turn by turn by turn, because you also have the Wondrous Moon attack for 3 Psychic Energy. You do 170, and you can move any number of Psychic from your Pokemon to your other Pokemon in any way that you like. So the idea is you can hit with the Clefable, protect all those energies, and move them on to single prize like Clefairies for later, so you can do higher damage output with the Clefairies. Probably still a meme deck at the end of the day. You've got to fill out your deck with Psychic Energy and a ton of switch outs with no draw power, so it's still kind of weak. Do we have anything else of interest? The Houndstone EX is just like the other Houndstone that we already have in formats, but it has a higher base damage output, but I don't think that changes too much about the deck in general. We have a Clorf that has, if this Pokemon is in the active and is damaged by an opponent's attack, you discard an energy from that Pokemon. 220 base hit points with the option to go bigger with the Bravery Charm is kind of interesting. So you are a bit of an annoying, throw it in the active position, spongy Pokemon, but we have enough one-hit KO that's not going to be that good. The Koraidon is much, much worse. Probably no reason to see play, unfortunately, even in these fighting decks. The Houndoom is also really bad. We have a lot of throwaway EXs, I think, this set. Was there anything else that interesting? The Melmetal is also a throwaway EX, I think. The Dragonite Terastal does 1 for 70, and then for Water Lightning, you do 140. Flip a coin if heads 140 more. If tails, this Pokemon can't attack during your next turn. It's a means of hitting 280 without having to have a damage mod. You need to have 2 different energy types in your deck, though, which is annoying. And flipping a coin is obviously unreliable, but it could be a meme deck, I suppose. I think that's it. I think that covers everything else that we want to talk about. Oh, there is Agreement. You look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put those cards into your hand or discard them, then draw 3. Yeah, fine. And 210, and you can't use it next turn. Yeah, terrible. So there we go. That rounds out most of the interesting cards, I think. Pretty much everything covered today. Let me know your thoughts on the Obsidian Flames set. Is it going to be a strong one? How impactful is it going to be? What do you think of Charizard? What do you think of Toadscruel? What do you think of Sizzle? How are these things going to be affecting the metagame? I'll hear your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.